Hi, I'm Bryan, and welcome to my podcast. If you're looking for something to listen to or something to keep you company, you've come to the right place. Let's talk about anything and everything under the sun here on How to Be Bryan. Hi there, listeners. This is your homeboy Bryan, and welcome to How to Be Bryan, the podcast. This is the reflections and musings of a young adult on a pursuit to educate and live purposefully. If you're listening to the show for the very first time, then please do not forget to subscribe. But if you are an old subscriber or follower, then welcome. We meet again. It's good to be back, and I'm sorry for being away. Well, I'm gone for a couple of weeks for a few reasons. First, I've been incredibly busy. I think it's that time of the month when you need to go and run a lot of errands. And second, it's due to the weather condition. So it has been raining nonstop for I think more than a week now, and I think the rain had affected my productivity. Or it's just that the weather makes you want to stay in bed the whole day, and so I wasn't able to record an episode for a couple of weeks, but it's good to be back on the show. And today I am introducing to you a new segment on the podcast, which is called Twitter Finds. So, from the word itself, it involves Twitter and tweets. But before we get into that, let me give you a brief background story of my love for Twitter. I think it has been established that I talk about the things that I love on this podcast, and one of those things is Twitter. So, here's a short story on how I got into Twitter. So I think I was in grade 6 at that time. It was 2010 or 2011. And one of my best friends actually asked me to join Twitter. And I was like, what is the advantage of me joining Twitter? Because at that time, social media is not yet a part of the lifestyle of people. And that friend marketed Twitter to me as a way of receiving updates from our favorite musicians and artists. And I was like, oh, I think it's a great idea if I join Twitter. Maybe I'll get to know the artists and musicians that I love firsthand if I follow them on Twitter. And hence, I created my first Twitter account in May 2011. So I think I was 12 years old at that time. And I used that account for several years until I lost access to it. And the reason why I lost that account is due to a stupidity that I committed. Twitter users out there, you know that there is a birthday option on Twitter. And for several years, I have indicated my birthday there without the actual birth year because I was afraid of broadcasting to everyone on Twitter that I was a minor at that time. And when I reached the legal age, I decided to put my real birth year on Twitter. And right at that moment, I got locked out of my account because Twitter detected this error that I created my account prior to turning 13 years old. And right at that point, I tried my best to regain access to my account, but Twitter kept telling me that I wasn't in the right age when I created that account. And so I totally lost access to that account. And it made me sad initially because that was my life back then. My teenage life revolved around Twitter and my interactions with the people that I am in touch with on Twitter. But it's also a good idea because I think I have gotten rid of a lot of embarrassing moments that I had when I was a teenager. And looking back at it, I think it might be a blessing in disguise that I lost access to that account at that time before I have even started working, because who knows, maybe my students will dig up my old tweets or find something embarrassing on Twitter that was posted by my teenager self. So I think it was a blessing in disguise. But after that, I think I had a love and hate relationship with Twitter. So sometime in 2016, I created a second Twitter account. I don't know why I created it in the first place, but I think it was an escape for me, because my first account during that period in my life was being stalked, and people used to stalk that account to fetch ideas on what was going through my life. And I think it was very difficult for me knowing that people are stalking that account and giving malice to my tweets. And when I lost my first Twitter, I turned that second Twitter account into my main account, and I only chose the people who will be able to follow me on that account. It's actually still public, and my username is still the same. I opted to use my old username, my original Twitter username, which is at Bryan Llamado, but this time I'm actually choosing who gets to see what's in that account. And even though it's public and I don't know who reads my tweets, I think it has become a better space for me. Not like my old Twitter account. I may not have the same amount of followers that I have before, but I think it's a better place for me now than it used to, because now I regulate my interactions and I choose wisely what to tweet about or what to post about. Anyway, that's just a brief background story on how I got into Twitter. And now let us go with the segment of the show called Twitter Finds. And on this segment, I will be reading some tweets on Twitter and I will be reacting to them. So I think I'll choose around 5 tweets, and let's get right into the first one. And the first tweet that I have chosen is a tweet by at Guyomi. It's at GWYOMI. And it says, "Why do I always overshare?" And then sad face emoticon. It's an emoticon, not an emoji. Okay, so upon reading this one, I think in real life I have the tendency to overshare, but here on the podcast, it's still very controlled. And I think I still haven't dished out anything that could ruin my reputation here on the podcast. And I don't think anyone would have the energy to listen to a 10-minute show or a 15-minute show just to fetch for issues. But yeah, in real life, I think I do have the tendency to overshare, especially when I'm with my friends. But I think it's a normal thing, right? When you're with your friends, you have the tendency to overshare everything. But maybe I have to think my boundaries as well. Maybe I have to limit what I share to people, what I share to my friends. Oh, and you know what came into my mind when I came across the term oversharing? I think it's oversharing of memes on Facebook. I don't know if you guys have the same news feed as I do, but my news feed on Facebook is always filled with memes. And it's not that I'm complaining, but I think it has become a culture on Facebook because Instagram is not like that, TikTok is not like that. It's only Facebook. I think there are several people who even share up to like 20 memes per day. I don't know if you would consider that oversharing, but there are some people whose posts would just flood my newsfeed. I don't know if I should unfollow them or not because some of the memes are funny. So let me know if I should unfollow or limit my interactions with them. Next tweet is from at Nixie. It's at NNICSYY. And it says, "I believe in no chats, but still friends supremacy." Oh, this one is nice. This one is very good for adult friendships. You know, as a young adult, and I think that has become the branding of this show, that this show is about the reflections and musings of a young adult. I have repeatedly said that. And adult friendships during this period of life, of our lives, is very different. You know, it's not like we're in high school or in college we're practically with our friends for most of the time because we actually go to school. Can you believe that there was a time when we actually went to school physically and did not just attend Zoom meetings? There is that time pre-pandemic. But after finishing school, it has become one of the most important lessons that I learned, that your friendship or your closeness to someone should not depend on your communication with them online. So I think the bond that you build with people should transcend that part of communication. Although I still do believe that communicating with friends is very important, but it's also important to give each other that privacy to live separate lives and bond together every once in a while just so you can keep up with one another. But it's very important that as adults and as young adults specifically, it's important for you to focus on your life. And just because you are not in touch or not talking to your friends 24/7 doesn't mean that they aren't your friends anymore. Just because you don't get to spend as much time as you used to, just because you don't eat lunch meals anymore, or you don't chat with each other, or you don't work on projects together or on school works together, doesn't mean that it will diminish the quality of your friendship. If anything, it gives you time apart to live life and catch up when it is necessary. So as they say, I think I can leave you with this quote that says, those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. So if they really matter to you, and if you really matter to them, then they will not mind that you are not spending that same amount of time that you used to. Again, it's fine to grow up and live your own life. And sometimes life takes us to different directions, but it doesn't mean that we will lose our friendship with the people that we love. And we're ending the episode on that note. If you like to continue the conversation, please stay tuned for the second part of this podcast. See you next week only here on this channel. That's it for this episode of How to Be Bryan the podcast. If you liked it, then please do not forget to subscribe and follow me on my social media accounts. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Paalam!